In actual fact, I'm a simple kampong boy, from a village in Bentong, Pahang. And life then, when I was a boy, was a very close relationship with nature. So really, we appreciate nature, and to appreciate nature, it has to be through science. Science teaches you to understand nature. So that's the kind of life that I have. But it's a very simple life then, as you know, many years back, before Merdeka, also during the early years of Merdeka, yeah, where people are generally not well off. They're kind of poor, but Malaysia then was not a starving nation. We still have lots of things to eat and things to wear. And here again, I think I have a happy family life. I came from a loving family of four siblings. I think the best motivator I could recall is, of course, my mother. And I always have high regards for mothers, really. But that is not to say that I don't have a higher regard for fathers. Fathers would always be the providers of a family. But the way I was brought up, my father would leave very early in the morning and came back in the evening. Well, he's the breadwinner, so to speak. But the real influence of the children was the mother, who was really the rock of the family, who supplemented our family income with the things that people do those time, like doing odd jobs. But one of the strengths of my mother is to inculcate in us to strive for a better future and to make them proud. And being a fairly religious person, she would every morning during prayers, especially during the Fajr prayers, she would ask for a lot of well-being on the children. So this kind of thing, very simple, but it inspired the children. Mind you, my father was a lorry driver, but 3 out of our 4 siblings went to university. So the other influence of my life, I think, were teachers. Teachers in the school, but I could recall the strongest influence would be teachers from the College of Agriculture, Malaya, of which I was then a student in the late 60s. There was one teacher or lecturer by the name of Pak Rashid, the late Pak Rashid, who really instilled something very deep inside me. It was during the first day of registering as a freshie at the College of Agriculture, Malaya. And like many kampong boys at that time, would like to sit at the back, the last row in the hall. So he picked me up, asked me where I came from, and he brought me to the front row of the hall. And as I was sitting down there, very nervous and very scared, he told me one thing. He said, "Zakri, fear no one." Then he left. Those 3 words are very strong for me, Of course, they were also teachers in Serdang. 2 notable ones were Tan Sri Rashtan Baba, Foundation Fellow of the ASM, and Tan Sri Muhammad Noor Ismail, who really gave me some good bearings in life, in particular dealing with the outside world. So I've never looked back, so life is really a good progression from then to what I am now. Well, I think it's kind of a natural progression of things also. It's kind of a evolutionary process in my life. As I told you earlier, I was brought up in a kampong, which is very close to nature. That imbued this respect for biodiversity. But all along, in fact, my training, even though it's agricultural, in agricultural science, but it's very close to biodiversity. Even in this part of the world, Malaysia, as you know, is one of the 17 mega diverse countries of the world. And do you know that some of the key crops today has its center of origin in Malaysia? Key crops like rice, like bananas, like oranges, like sugarcane. Those have their origins in our part of the world. So looking at it, globally is kind of a natural process. And why my interest in biodiversity? In fact, at the time when I got very interested in international relations, one of the burning issues then was the loss of biodiversity worldwide, not only for our part of the world, but worldwide. But at the same time, biodiversity is really the underpinning of life, because biodiversity provides us food, provides us water, provides us clean air, and on and on. So if you destroy or erode biodiversity, you're really destroying the underpinning of life. So with that kind of perspective, and also the long years that I spent as a member of the Malaysian delegation in negotiation of some of the key United Nations treaties has made me, has endeared this particular issue to me, biodiversity. And this is also strengthened when I went to the United Nations University, and I was the director of its Institute of Advanced Studies at the Tokyo campus from 2001 and 2008. And here again, one of my main remit is how to champion the conservation of biodiversity, but at the same time, having the need to utilize that biodiversity for our own needs. Again, here it captures Malaysia's position. We are a developing country. We are not a country that only conserve biodiversity, which has been propounded by many people, in particular from the industrialized Western countries. Countries like Malaysia still have the right, the need to develop its land mass for maybe agriculture, maybe housing. But the question is to strike a balance between conservation and sustainable use. In fact, I must say Malaysia is at the forefront of this particular debate. One example is how we proceed with land opening as exemplified by the FELDA schemes, where there is one mechanism to alleviate poverty. And the FELDA scheme has been singled out by renowned economists like Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University, who had pointed out that that is one form of poverty alleviation that should be copied by many countries of the world. But at the same time, we have been receiving brickbats. People saying that by opening up land for oil palm, for instance, we are destroying the habitats of some iconic species like the orangutan. But if you come to Malaysia, as I told many friends from overseas, you would see that the government is trying its best to balance this. How? We have a number of protected areas for orangutan and all the other wild fauna in this country. So the strive for balance has always been there, has always been led by the political leadership of this country. Yes, this is a very interesting question. How do you develop policies, strategies, or programs to promote science or even to practice sustainable development? In actual fact, this is not a question unique to Malaysia. Other countries, in particular developing countries, have been facing the same problems. I think there's a need to bridge the gap between the scientific community and the policymakers, the politicians who are responsible for developing laws and acts to realize this objective. We are still not there yet. The understanding is still lacking. Science knows a lot, but how do you transmit that message to the policymakers? That is the challenge that scientists has to face. And it has not always been easy, because you must also appreciate the viewpoint of the politician, and their main concern is for the rakyat. And when you talk about the rakyat, two things come to mind. One is the well-being, kesejahteraan rakyat. That means maybe a better income for them. Secondly, is jobs and jobs. And the politician is very sensitive about that. They must create jobs. So any policies that scientists would also try to recommend for the politician to adopt must take into account this realistic political question. Only then can we be successful. I think this is one department that we can improve. There's still lots of gaps. And through my experience on the international platform, now around 30 years, there's still a lack of involvement of Malaysian scientists at the global level. Our scientists are still contented to be playing the role internally in the country, when in actual fact the stake is very high outside there for us to articulate our position, because no one else is going to take care of us. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to articulate our viewpoints, and the only way to do that is to go outside and be part of the system. I was kind of lucky, because in a way I was trained to be in that role. I started as the technical advisor to our Malaysian delegation in this negotiation of some of those treaties I mentioned earlier. One of them is the Convention on Biological Diversity. That experience has sort of strengthened my confidence to interact with the international community. And when you are already having that experience, you will realize the Malaysian is no less able than any other person from any other country in the world. So it's incumbent for Malaysian scientists to champion those causes at the global level. Yes. Well, first and foremost, I think the young scientists should aspire to be a good scientist. That means they have to do research, they have to publish, they have to attend scientific meetings. That is one basic remit for any scientist. So you must be holding your own. You must be a productive one and a credible one. Beyond that, because scientist is also an ordinary citizen. So they cannot insulate themselves from problems faced by society. And they could contribute a lot because they have this training, they have this knowledge. Secondly, of course, go out there. The whole world is at your feet, you know. And one element here that they need to think about is to develop this network of fellow scientists all over the world, you know, and not just to have your own colleagues inside the country as your benchmark. So you have to set the standards higher, you know. And I think with time, one would succeed, inshallah.